How a man lost $8 million for failing to be a decent human. Alright, I have a story to tell from the finance industry. For those of you who don't know what we do, it's basically just being a realtor, but for companies instead of houses. This was an investment banking firm, and we specialize in smaller players. We're talking companies worth $20 to $50 million. Our customers are typically salt of the earth, built their entire company from nothing but a shed and a truck over the last 30 years, and now they want to retire. But seeing as how many of them never learned accounting and whatnot, they need representation. Now, one company has two 50% owners, and they hate each other. Can't have a civil conversation. Now, having two 50-50 owners is always a recipe for conflict, but this level of hatred was something I hadn't seen before. It was pretty clear one of the two had done something pretty bad for it to devolve to this stage. So let's call one Tim and one Roger. My first impression of Roger is that he's a nice dude, down to earth, chill, and generally interested in things. My first impression of Tim is that he's a raging imbecile. We were at a restaurant I and many other people in my city hold in very high regard, and all he did for an hour and a half was complain about the food. He talked down to and mocked a waiter who dared to ask him what he'd like to drink, and proceeded to order $1,000 of wine since he knew we were paying. My boss, having none of that, made it clear that Tim is paying for that bottle, which I suppose put him in a bad mood. I am somewhat obsessed with food. I spend an unwise amount of money on food. I can sing you all the instrumental parts in the opening of Heston Blumenthal's cooking show. We're here on my recommendation. I love this damn restaurant, and I'm on first name terms with that waiter. Then the man starts talking down to me about my tastes after I order, says kids these days have no palate, and that I should be eating X. Oh, and also apparently donating to vaccine charities is a waste of money, and I'm some sort of idiot for doing so. So to be short, I don't like the guy. But not liking the guy isn't really a reason to seek revenge. However, after talking to Roger, we found out why they hate each other. You see, Tim had been stealing money from his employees and the company. It turns out employees started getting random checks bounced, and the company's line of credit kept drying up, because Tim had been making some rather extravagant purchases on the company dime. He had adjusted employee payroll downwards and increased his own. He had used capital expenditures to build himself a house. Apparently, his continued justification is that none of what he did was illegal. Technically true. He had helped grow the company, I suppose, and that he deserved more, but not his business partner. Roger ended up comping employees out of his own pocket, and Tim refused to pay back a dime. So at this point, the deal talks are going nowhere, as in Tim and Roger just cannot stand to communicate with each other at all. But my boss, he hatches an idea. Why don't we just buy one of them out? We know how much money the company is worth in the wider market. We'll just see if either is willing to take some cash up front for their share of the equity. I make models all day. I know how much this company is worth. It's worth about $24 million. Tim's stake is therefore worth $12 million. Complex, I know. Guess whose stake I suggest we buy? Tim's, of course. How much do I suggest we offer? $4 million. Now, to be clear, this type of thing has a downside. But Tim's reputation in his industry isn't good. In fact, after some canvassing, it turns out that most people know this company through Roger, and don't like to deal with Tim. Turns out being a thieving a-hole is something one simply cannot turn off. Boss says okay. He'll send an offer letter and an NDA agreement, etc. Tim bites for $6 million. We sold the company 6 weeks later for $28 million total. Screw you, Tim. Edit. No, Tim was not happy when he found out. No, he could not do a damn thing about it. Edit 2. I should mention that my boss and a few of his friends pooled the money to make the buy. They were not acting as part of the bank. Any offer they gave was part of private negotiations as a counterparty. Tim should have hired his own bankers, but he didn't. The most expensive way to ever get the police involved. My wife and I had a first-floor condo in what had previously been a nice complex. Unfortunately, over time, the couple who lived above us, hereby designated AA for Angry Alcoholic and AAG for Angry Alcoholic Girlfriend, began drinking heavily. Or maybe they just got louder about their drinking. Nearly every night became a massive screaming match between them. They stayed up until 2 a.m. shouting at each other at the top of their lungs. Then one of them would put on music at top volume to drown out the other. Their taste in music wasn't actually bad, but when it's 2 a.m. and my floor is vibrating, it's a problem. Sometimes they'd even take their fight out into the parking lot, just to be sure all the neighbors were treated to a detailed explanation of who had cheated on who recently, and who was threatening to dump who and leave right now. Neither of them ever actually left. They just went out to their car and threatened to, loudly. Then in the mornings, he would work on his car, in the carport right outside our front door. As far as I could tell, all he did was sit there and rev the engine for what seemed like hours on end. I have no idea when he slept. Maybe while we were at work. We and all the other neighbors complained to the condo board, who issued a warning, which AA and AAG ignored. Eventually, the condo board started fining them, but AA found a genius solution. Just don't pay the fine. All the condo board could do was eventually put a lien on AA's condo, but that would only become a problem for him when he sold the place. Apparently, they couldn't actually foreclose on them, or maybe they just didn't want to go to the trouble. Trying to talk to him directly was useless. If we managed to catch him during a rare moment of sobriety, he'd just kind of blow us off. But if we caught him while he was drunk, he'd get pretty threatening, and was then even louder for a few days. We even tried calling the police, but they weren't really interested unless he actually crossed the line into a felony. They gave him a few warnings, which he also ignored. Maybe if he'd actually beaten me or one of my neighbors up, they'd have done something. But none of us felt like getting into a fight to find out. Plus, there was always the risk that the cops would arrest everybody involved in the fight on general principles, and none of us wanted an arrest record. Eventually, my wife and I decided to sell our condo and move, for multiple reasons that definitely included AA and AG. Because of the timing of our move, our realtor wound up actually showing the condo while we were home a couple of times, and we discovered that one of the potential buyers was a city police officer, her husband, and their 1-year-old baby. I guess their old place was too small now that they had a kid. Unfortunately, their offer was $3,500 below the top offer, but after talking it over, we told our realtor to accept their offer anyway, and we'd just eat the loss. So AA and AAG had a cop move in directly below them. I'm Facebook friends with a couple of our old neighbors, and in the 6 months since we moved, AA has been arrested multiple times, and had his car impounded at least once. Apparently, he's now trying to be quieter, but that only lasts until he gets drunk, and then he's screaming again. And his new downstairs neighbor has long ago had enough of his crap, and does not appreciate it if he wakes up her kid. And I guess she also doesn't appreciate it if he shouts at her. He's in an obnoxious neighbor war with a cop, and he's losing badly. Hopefully soon he'll wind up in jail for longer than a couple of days. Lie, cheat, lay off, and gamble with our wages? Enjoy no IT department. Years back, I worked as the IT director for a small brokerage firm. These types of places try to run lean, so I was also the only IT personnel. I took the job, but was a bit underqualified if I'm being truthful. The reason they gave it to me was because I was young, and they thought they could underpay me. They were right. It was $10,000 more than I'd ever made in my life. I had a shitty job at the time, so I took it for the resume title step. And honestly, it did work out as a good resume builder. I struggled and had to do an endless amount of learning on the job, but I made huge improvements. The day-to-day was sketchy there. We only had 5 employees supporting the 4 partners and the 70-plus brokers. Brokers didn't really work there. They rented a desk for a percentage, so they didn't care how many brokers there were on staff. There were a couple of gems, but ultimately we were understaffed because they looked at full-time employees like we were stealing from them. They made us work long hours and work weekends with no overtime. Everyone was underpaid, or they were an overpaid buddy of someone. Worse was the shitty partners. The 4 partners were constantly doing shady shit. One partner would take money from broker commissions and go to Vegas with it. If he lost the money, we're talking $100,000 plus per trip, he would just let the brokers know there's a hold from the bank and their commissions are coming in slow. Another broker asked me straight up how to hide his affair from his wife. Another had me come to his house on company time and install some audio and video equipment after hours, without paying me. When I came on board, they were 10 years out of date on technology. I helped them get up to 100%. Redundant ISP lines, redundant network equipment, off-sited the mail to make it more reliable, dozens of improvements, and everyone was pretty happy. All brokers and employees loved the improvements. Then the partners started doing really sketchy stuff. They had me open employee exchange mailboxes and run mail queries on email addresses. Turns out they were lawyer emails between the lawyer and their client, a broker, or employee. They had me do this all the time for anyone. I would have to collect it all, and then they would fire them and keep their clients. It's illegal in the brokerage firm to look at them. I didn't know that at the time. They somehow convinced the lending company to merge with them. Totally different crew. They were nice, honest, real customer focused. I made friends with one of the lending agents. He helped me search for houses on his MLS account during lunch. Nicest guy. His wife and her dad ran the firm until the merger. I found out the plan was to fire everyone from the firm and just steal the name and the client list. They had only been there a few months, long enough to learn their business. I also found out they were going to fire me now that everything was more reliable. Guess how I found out? During an email query one of the partners had me do on another partner. So the only nice people at this shithole were getting locked out of their offices over the weekend. I was getting fired now that I had essentially made myself redundant in their mind. Well, let me tell you about the red folder. The red folder was locked in my file cabinet. It contained every password for admin access to every system. It also contained the fire plan, or downtime plan of every system in the company. My boss didn't really understand why we needed one, and he never really looked at it. Well, I called my friend who worked for the lending firm. I told him to head to the office and grab all the files and computers. They technically belonged to them anyways. I told him the plan about changing the locks over the weekend. I told him that I was quitting and not to mention me. He said he understood, and thanks. I changed the only other admin password that my boss had access to. I shredded the red folder. I emailed my resignation. They begged me to come back. They offered me a 30% pay bump. They said they were shocked I was so disloyal. I heard years later from the secretary that worked there at the time, it took them 4 months to get all systems under control again. They had to use a contractor they had relied on before. I heard it cost them a year of my salary. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next video.